Thank you very much, Ed. I appreciate it. And good morning, everybody. It's always good to be back in the great state of California. I was a teacher at Pensacola Christian College for 9 years and taught the variety of biological science courses for the pre-med majors and the nurses and all. And then Dr. John Morris, a dear friend of mine, the president of ICR at that time in the, about the mid-1990s, he called me from San Diego and asked if I would come and work at ICR in San Diego. And so we made the trek from Pensacola to San Diego, never regretted it at all, regretted leaving my friends there at PCC, but it'd been wonderful serving the Lord in creation science since 1996, okay? And so it is good to be here back in California. I dearly love California. Love the mountains, love the ocean and the desert. We were members of Shadow Mountain Community Church, and SMCC would have retreats with the father-son out in the desert. We'd shoot off rockets and have wonderful fellowship. I would give boring creation science lectures about the ecology of the desert and put everybody to sleep, but it really was a very good time. Folks, the average speaking speed is about 180 words per minute. I'm going to clip right along at 250 with gusts up to 300. And so listen carefully, because I do want to cover some evidences for creation, as Ed has said. And by the way, I do appreciate the music that was given this morning, all glorifying the Creator and not the creation, as the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 1. And so we love that. And so I want Rob to raise his hand. Rob was a music minister and working with young people in music and all. And so it's been a joy serving the Lord and working with Rob here this weekend. And then tomorrow, Monday, I'll be down in San Diego seeing 50% of my children, my two oldest daughters. And so they live down there. Anyway, let's move on and talk about the scientific case for creation. Maybe let's start with some sobering statistics that the number of Americans with no religion rose 266%. That's about 1/3 of the population in just 3 decades. And how sad that is. That's one of the saddest things I can say. Back when I was in high school in I was taught that there was only about 1 or 2% of the population that were atheists, and now that has really ballooned, that has blossomed. Mainline Protestant Christianity is just 10.8% of the U.S. population. These statistics come from just last year. So we have our work cut out for us, do we not? And so these, again, are very sobering statistics. Mainline Protestant Christianity, just 10.5% of the U.S. population. Well, and then we find all sorts of distractions and protests and all that of individuals who have no fear of God and have no fear of the hereafter, and they're proud to tell everybody that. There's a survey that was taken about 4 years ago, why Americans nuns, that's a new group of people in society, Americans nuns left religion behind. This includes many respondents who mentioned science as the reason they don't believe in religious teachings. Well, folks, the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 1 that God's creation is not only seen, but Paul says clearly seen. God's creation is clearly seen, ladies and gentlemen. Why is that? It's because God loves us, doesn't He? He loves us so much that He has made His living creation, even though it's been corrupted by sin, not only seen, but clearly seen. And here are the 2 reasons that young people give for leaving the faith. Number 1, learning about evolution when they went away to college. And again, it's so sad because many Christian colleges and universities are now unashamedly teaching this molecules to man philosophy. Fish to philosopher, from particles to people. And of course, that's not what Genesis teaches at all. And then the second statement is lack of any sort of scientific or specific evidence of a creator. Folks, I can tell you right now, there is so much compelling and reasonable evidence for creation. Again, even though this creation has been corrupted and cursed by sin, Genesis chapter 3. 1 Peter 3:15 has been mentioned numerous times throughout this weekend, but it is so true. My dear wife Jan and I have taught our 4 children as they were growing up to have an apologia, to have an apologetic. Look at what Peter says. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give a what? An answer, that is an apologia, an apologetic. And what we like to say is knowing why you believe what you believe. Do you believe in creation this morning? That's commendable. That's wonderful. But why do you believe in creation as opposed to the strange philosophy called evolution? And then Peter goes on to say, every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and with fear. We have to temper what we say with meekness and with fear. It's easier to win a person with honey than vinegar, right? And so that's what Peter's talking about. We are not afraid of science at the Institute for Creation Research, and Ed gave a very gracious introduction there. We love science at ICR. We embrace science. Science is what we really know to be true, isn't it? And for example, here with observation and testing and repeating, are we afraid of that at ICR? Not at all, not at all. We all conduct observation, testing, and repeating at ICR as we do research. It's even in our name, isn't it? And so I enjoy doing science. I got my degrees in science because I enjoy it so much, but I have a real problem with this idea that says, and it's a strange idea, that people came from fish. Do you believe that? I sure hope not. Fish have always been fish. Very good. Fish, that's very profound, isn't it? See, science is very easy. Fish have always been fish. If you look into the fossil record, you find fossil fish, but you don't find their alleged evolutionary ancestors. So we enjoy science at ICR. We embrace it. As a matter of fact, science and the Bible go together beautifully. They go together just like butter and bread. They interwoven each other, just like politics and corruption, science and the Bible. And so we enjoy science at ICR. Christians need to identify where science leaves off and philosophy begins. And so, for example, at the Perot Museum in Dallas, where I live, the Perot Museum kind of does a sleight of hand. I don't want to denigrate them, but there's so many young people that go through this hands-on Perot Museum, and it's strictly secular in its worldview. And so we'll have signs, for example, that says that you have iron in your blood. Is that a true scientific statement? Shake your head like this. Yeah, we have iron in our blood. It's called hemoglobin. It's a little iron atom, and it has 4 bonds coming off it, and it makes up what we call the hemoglobin molecule, designed by the Creator to carry oxygen and also carbon dioxide. And it's very efficient, and then God puts those hemoglobin molecules in our red blood cells. So far, so good. But then the Perot Museum takes a very, very philosophical step and says that the iron in your blood came from a supernova, unknown reaches in space, an unknown, impossibly old period of time ago. That's the philosophy. The philosophy that says the iron in your blood came from a supernova impossibly long ago in areas that they don't even know where that occurred. So that's a philosophy. But to say that you have iron in your blood, we can do that, right? We can do observation, testing, and repeating and come to the conclusion we have iron in our blood. And that's what the Creator used to carry efficiently the oxygen atoms that oxygenates our tissue. So we should understand where science leaves off and philosophy begins. For example, the Psalm 14:1, we all know that. An atheist is someone who believes in the scientifically strange. So the atheist believes, and I'm not criticizing them, I'm simply parroting what they believe, and that is that nothing created what? Everything. Everything came from nothing. Now, that's what atheists believe. I'm simply saying what they believe. Everything came from nothing. Question of the morning is, can we conduct an experiment that shows how something comes from nothing? Well, let's put on a white lab coat, go into a stainless steel 21st century laboratory, and adjust the bells and whistles that will show that something comes from nothing. I kind of chuckle because you can't do that, can you? Doesn't matter how many white lab coats you wear. There's no way that you can show that anything comes from nothing. You don't think too hard about nothing because you'll go cuckoo. Nothing is the whole bunch of nothing. And so you can't go into a lab to show how that happens. What, you open up a cupboard, get a box of nothing. Open it up, great. We're out of nothing. So you can't do anything to validate scientifically the atheistic conviction that everything came from nothing. So what does it take to believe that everything came from nothing? Faith. It takes faith. A lot of faith to say, I believe that everything came from nothing. I cannot prove it scientifically that that's what I believe. That's faith, right? Wait a minute, the atheists can turn the table, can't they? And say, what about you Christians? You're always talking about faith. You're always talking, and does it take faith to believe that in the beginning God created? Say yes. Yeah, it takes faith to believe that everything, that in the beginning God created. But ours, I would say, is a more reasonable faith. Did you get that? You can write it in the notes there. Ours is a more reasonable faith. Our faith is based on someone who was there when? In the beginning, exactly right. God was there, the Creator, in the beginning, and He told us what He did, right? And the atheist has faith that nothing created everything. And so that's really a very graphic representation of these two competing worldviews. In the beginning, nothing, versus in the beginning, God. So it's not that just both of them require faith, and that's true, but ours is a more reasonable faith based on someone who was there in the beginning. So that's kind of an overview. How about this? Is this science as we do an experiment here in worldviews? About 13.8, I like how they get the 0.8 there, billion years ago, the entire observable universe was the size of a peach and had a temperature of over 1 trillion degrees. Wow, and that happened just 13.8 billion years ago. So the question in the morning is, was anybody there to make that measurement? And, well, look at this, over 1 trillion degrees. I better write that down. No. And so is this science? Shake your head like this. This is not science. And we would have to ask the question, in order for somebody to say that, how do they know it? Were they there? Did they observe? Remember my definition of science in a previous slide? Science is what we can observe, test, and repeat. And nobody was there 13.8 billion years ago to measure the temperature and to measure the size. I like that, the size of a peach. Not a grape, not a watermelon, a peach. 13.8 billion years ago. I'm not making fun, but what I want you to see is that nobody was there in the beginning to validate this statement. So what is this? This is a philosophy. This is a religion. This is not science, because it cannot be validated by science. How about this very quickly? Our bones and brains are composed of ancient atoms constructed by stellar fusion long before the solar system existed. All right, we finally get into some science. No, we don't. This is still philosophy. This was a one-time event that occurred in the unobserved past. Just like the universe being the size of a peach with over 1 trillion degrees was a one-time event that occurred in the unobserved past. But wait a minute. What about creation? Creation was a one-time event that occurred in the unobserved past. So once again, we're talking about faith versus faith. But again, as I would like to emphasize, ours is a more reasonable faith. It's more reasonable to believe Genesis 1:1, that God was there when? In the beginning. And He told us what happened. He expects us to read about it and to believe it and to tell others about it. Isn't that neat? That's the message of creation and the redemptive work of the Lord Jesus Christ, the Creator Himself, who came to earth and lived among us for 33 years, saying the most profound things that ever have been said, doing the most amazing things that have ever done. And what's the ultimate proof of His deity? Begins with the letter R. Resurrection. The resurrection. The tomb of Buddha is occupied. The tomb of Confucius is occupied. The tomb of Muhammad, occupied. The tomb of Jesus is empty. Empty. He is not here. He is risen. That is a litmus test for the unique nature of the Christian faith. Ours is the only faith, religion, if you can use that word, that has the Creator who took on the form of a human being and did, as I just mentioned, and as an ultimate proof, rose physically from the dead. I like to ask atheists that, because I do a lot of speaking around the country, and I encounter atheists on occasion, and I simply ask them a very innocent question. Give me the legal historical evidence for the non-resurrection, the non-physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. In other words, you don't believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus? No, they don't believe that. Good. Now tell me why. Give me legal historical evidence as why Jesus did not rise physically from the dead. And until you can do that, I believe what the Scriptures say, and that the Creator of this universe rose physically from the dead. And by the way, evidences for creation doesn't stop there. It also includes Genesis 1:1, the most profound scientific statement that has ever been made. You talk to a cosmologist, she or he will tell you that we live in a universe composed of time and space. And what's the third one? Time, space, and matter. Time, space, and matter. Matter and energy are interconvertible, right? That's what Einstein was talking about when he said E equals mc squared. See how easy science is? And so even the most committed evolutionist will believe that this universe is composed of time and space and matter. Look at Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, that's the beginning of time. God created the heavens, that's space, and the earth, matter. So in the first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the book of books, God, who has always existed, spoke into the creation. We call it an ex nihilo creation, the time, space, matter universe. Oh, by the way, do we live in a multiverse or a universe? There's some hesitation there. We live in a universe, don't we? Right. What does the prefix uni mean? One. Time, space, and matter. 3 in one. Whoa. Isn't that neat? That's enough to make a Baptist shout. All right, well, let's move on. So, science is a search for what, class? Truth. Science is a search for truth. Do you agree with that statement? I agree 100% with that statement. This is a 2-time Nobel Prize winning scientist who said that science is the search for truth. Yeah, I agree with that. You know why? John chapter 14 and verse 6. Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father except by me. I'm a life scientist. I'm a zoologist, and I like to study life. And the Lord Jesus Christ is the author and the giver and the sustainer of what? Life. And we also say, if you're taking notes, that life is complex. If it's living, it's complex. There is no such thing as simple life. The two do not agree. And so, Jesus is the author and the giver and sustainer of life. He is life. And so when we study life, we are studying the Creator Himself, as it were, and the processes that He did. As a biologist, this is what I love to study. This is one of my favorite verses as a biologist. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world. What's the next 2 words, class? Clearly seen. So God's creation is not only seen, it's clearly seen. It's, if you will, painfully obvious. God's creation is clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead. And then Paul ends with a sobering statement, doesn't he? Not yours truly, not the Institute for Creation Research. The Apostle Paul says, so that they are without excuse. That's a warning, isn't it? In other words, when a life scientist or anybody looks out in God's living creation, even though it's been corrupted by sin, Paul says the case for creation is clearly seen. I like this Calvin and Hobbes. Mom says, time for your bath, let's go. Calvin puts up his puny little hand and says, sorry, I'm in denial about baths. Mom says, fine, plonk, go ahead and deny it. Calvin says, nobody respects my denial. And I look at that and I think about how when I talk to scientists who are not Christian, who are atheistic, they put up, if you'll forgive me, their puny little hand and say what? Sorry, but I'm in denial about evidence for creation. And how tragic that is. They're in denial about evidence for creation, even though Paul says what? What are the two words, class? Clearly seen. Let's say it together. Clearly seen. And so, conversely, evolution is not clearly seen. God's creation is clearly seen. This is a favorite quote of many people, and so I just included this. Evolution is a what? It's a faith that unknown chemicals came together in an unknown way, at an unknown place, at an unknown time, using an unknown process to produce life. And that's why evolution is taught as a fact in American taxpayer-paid public schools. Because everything about evolution is what? Unknown. It's unknown. And they're going to use your hard-earned tax dollars to teach the next generation that they came from a fish. And as we say in Texas, I'm again it. I'm again it, okay? I say let's use those hard-earned tax dollars to teach real science, not this bizarre idea that people came from a fish and the fish came from an invertebrate, which in turn came from bacteria, which in turn came from non-living material. That's a fantastic religion, but that is not science. And so this is one of the more popular slides I show. Science without debate is propaganda. That's another point that you might want to write down. Science without debate is propaganda. The whole purpose behind science is knowing what we really know to be true, and of course that involves discussion and debate. And this is what one famous individual said, and I quote, "A fair result can be obtained only by fully stating and balancing the facts and arguments on both sides of the question." Do you agree with that? I agree 100%. Yes, a fair result can be obtained only by, etc., etc. Question of the morning, ladies and gentlemen, is who said that? Who said that statement that I agree with so much as a scientist? The answer might surprise you. Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin said that in 1859. So there's precious few things, but this is one thing that I do agree with the bearded Buddha, Charles Darwin. And that, yes, indeed, he says, let's go ahead and discuss this. And I'm in thorough agreement with him. Let's go ahead and discuss this, because science without debate is what? Propaganda. And so this comes from Discover magazine about 12 years ago. We have a lot of really, really strange coincidences, and all of these coincidences are such that it makes life possible. So the secular individual, the secular scientist, would never say, "In the beginning, God," and so they put all their trust and faith in what? Coincidences. Okay, how coincidental this is. And we're saying, no, it's not coincidence, it's Christ. It's not coincidence, it's Christ. Here's another quote from a two secular evolutionists, one of which is down in La Jolla. "What is extraordinary is a happy combination of circumstances. Our planet's orbit is roughly circular around a relatively stable star. Earth is large enough to hold an atmosphere," and it goes on to describe that. So this individual, these two secular authors, Garrison and Ellis, talk about a happy combination of circumstances. Hey, que sera, sera. It just whatever will be, will be. And so we find that evolutionists will consider coincidences and combinations of circumstances, but they won't contemplate who? The Creator. They won't contemplate the Creator. They put all their trust, all their faith in coincidences and combinations of circumstances. How tragic. How tragic, because the Creator loves us and He has revealed His living creation to us that we might enjoy it and give glory to Him and worship Him, the Creator, and not the creation. How tragic that is. This is a very graphic example of this war of the worldviews. And so when we come to our worldview, we must place it on one who was there in the beginning, the book of beginnings, the book of Genesis. And the C's of biology I mentioned earlier, so I won't go through it again, but the C's of the Bible are very clear. Creation, corruption, curse, the catastrophe, Christ in the cradle, the cross, and the crown. And the last book of the Bible is what? Revelation. Let's say that's the consummation of all things. And this is a 30-second Bible study. So Genesis is the true origins account. Some people think Genesis is just a story, but all 50 chapters are written in the historical narrative Hebrew. God wants us to believe His word from where? From the very first verse. Remember we discussed Genesis 1:1, time, space, and matter, all in the first verse of the first chapter. I would say that no other religious writing begins like the book of Genesis, specifically the Bible. There's no other religious writing that begins with God always existing, standing outside of the creation, speaking into creation, the time, space, and matter universe. All the other religions, not making fun of them, but they all begin with what? Fire, wind, water, earth, something like that, or some kind of permutation of those, except for one religious writing, the Bible. So creation science is found in Genesis chapter 1, and God says that He created after their kind, how many times? 10 times. 10 times God told us that He created after their kind, after its kind, after His kind in Genesis chapter 1. Do you think maybe God is trying to tell us something when He repeats Himself, when He is redundant and repeats Himself, when He is redundant and repeats Himself? Okay, not once, not twice, but 10 times in a single chapter in the book of Genesis. God wants us to get it straight. He did not use evolution because He says over and over again, He created after their kind. One of my favorite examples of creation are the puppy dog, okay? And there are all sorts of varieties of puppy dogs, aren't they? Some of those huge Mexican Chihuahuas that lady carries around in their purse, or those little bitty Great Danes that you're yapping and snipping around your heels and all that. And even when we were in Southern California, in San Diego, 15 years ago, we had a Canardly dog. Have you seen those Canardly dogs? You can hardly tell what kind of dog they are. And thank you. I'll be here all morning. And even horribly mutated dogs like poodles. Okay, and so dogs have always been what, class? Dogs, whether they're cold dogs or hot dogs. Okay. Dogs have always been dogs. Okay. And I have to tell you, they were delicious. Okay, so dogs have always been dogs. What is the most popular dog in America, the North American continent, and in the British Isles, England and Wales and Scotland? What's the most popular breed of dog in all of those countries? The what? It's the, what is it? Oh, it's not there. There it is. What is it? The Labrador Retriever. Labrador Retriever. So we have the gold Labrador Retriever, but it's still a what? It's still a Labrador Retriever. How about this? This is the Black Lab. Look at that Black Lab. Yes, the Black Lab, okay? And then what's a third kind of Labrador Retriever? A chocolate lab. So, but they're all labs, aren't they? Right? Just varieties, just variations. So we have the gold lab, the black lab, the chocolate lab. We have some strange neighbors in our cul-de-sac in Dallas. We're pretty sure they have meth lab. Okay. So this is the meth lab. Yeah. Okay, and so here's the question in the morning. Where did domestic dogs come from? Okay, what was the origin? Where did domestic dogs come from? And that's a good question to ask. And by the way, do we have enough dogs to study? Shake your head like this. We have millions upon millions of domestic dogs to study to answer the question, where, this is an innocent question for the evolutionist, where did domestic dogs come from? And so Benton said in his book, Invertebrate Paleontology, just 5 years ago, the history of today's dogs is what? Is still contentious. They still don't know where the puppy dogs came from, all right? How many million dogs do we have in the USA? Got 90 million the last time I counted, okay? So we have a lot of dogs out there to study. But hey, what about cats? We cannot forget the cats. Little is known about the genetic changes that distinguish domestic cat populations from their wild progenitors. In other words, what? Cats have always been cats. See how easy science is? Cats have always been cats. 600 have always been chimpanzees. Dinosaurs, which we love at ICR, dinosaurs, we call them missionary lizards. Dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs. Clams have always been clams. And so that's what the fossil record shows. And if you're taking notes, please write this down. The missing links are missing. Very profound thing to say this morning. The missing links are missing. We don't have those missing links that would validate the evolution of one kind into another kind. No, we don't see that in the fossil record. Dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs, dogs have always been dogs, and on the list it goes. And so I'm reminded of a Bible verse, and I just want to share this Bible verse. I tweaked it a little bit, okay? I altered it just a little bit. I hope you'll forgive me. But when it comes to the fossil record, now, evolution is the substance of fossils hoped for, the evidence of links not seen, okay? And so that's a good verse. If I can just kind of, like I say, tweak it a little bit. Look what this says, a quote there at the bottom of the page when we talk about so-called human evolution. Over the past 15 years, almost every part of our story, and they're talking about the story of human evolution, every assumption about who our ancestors were and where we came from has been called into question. Has been called into question. They still don't know the basics, the fundamentals of so-called human evolution. I, as a zoologist this morning, believe that the phrase human evolution is an oxymoron. Okay? It's like saying airline food is an oxymoron, all right? Or jumbo shrimp. That's an oxymoron, right? Microsoft works. Okay, and so it is with so-called human evolution. People have always been what? People. People have always been people. We have no evolutionary ancestry. So is it really possible to talk honestly and fairly about scientific evidence for creation? Rob, I hope you're watching the clock there and see how I'm doing. Okay, is there scientific evidence for creation? Shake your head like this. Yeah, there's plenty of scientific evidence for creation. Remember what Paul said in Romans chapter 1? God's creation is, and he used two words. Clearly seen. Very good. A for the morning. Clearly seen. Clearly seen creation. Starting with the created cosmos, if you're writing down notes, these are the three options for the origin of our entire universe, the cosmos. Number one, it's always existed. Number two, it suddenly appeared from nothing. That would be a neat trick. And number three, it was created supernaturally, okay? And when you talk to the atheists, they certainly don't want to appeal to number three because creation means a creator. Design means a designer. If things look tailor-made, there might be a tailor, okay? And so they avoid that, but they also understand that the universe hasn't always existed. It's always been here. There had to be a beginning. And so what they believe, well, let me just share with you a quote from Scientific American, the mid-1980s. It is then tempting to go one step further and speculate, hey, there's a good scientific word, speculate that the entire universe evolved from what? Literally nothing. You remember what it takes to believe such a thing? Faith, very good. It takes faith to believe that everything came from nothing. But they don't want to bend the knee to a creator. And so they say everything came from nothing. This is Alan Guth, a wonder kid of the expanding universe idea, and his co-author Steinhardt. Everything, poof, came from nothing. Okay? Poof, that's a scientific word. All right? Okay, and then our unique solar system. Our unique solar system is simply that. It's unique. And here's a question of the morning. What's the closest star to Earth? Good. People are hesitating. Good. A couple of people said the sun. They're absolutely correct. The sun is the closest star to Earth. Now, statistically, and this is a true statistic. This is not fake news, not some kind of strange idea or fake news. And all this fake news reminds me of an explosion at the boarding house. Rumors were flying. Rumors. We're flying. Okay, thank you. And so, what's the closest star to Earth? Our sun. And so, when we look at the sun, here's what we read about way back in the year 2018, 2 years ago. And I would say this in the gold letters there at the top, if we can't understand our sun, how can scientists claim to know so much about the origin of the universe if they don't even understand our sun? Now, I'm not criticizing them, but there's so much to learn about the sun, which is so close to us. And statistically, and this is not an urban legend, 50% of this country, the people of this country, don't know that the sun is a star. So statistically, that means a person sitting next to you. But the sun is a star. It says our yellow dwarf star is, in many ways, a what? A mystery. The outreaching corona is hundreds of times hotter than the sun's actual surface, confounding scientists. In addition, physicists don't know what's driving the solar wind. The solar wind, ladies and gentlemen, is brutal. The solar wind comes out and it would absolutely microwave us within just a couple of hours. And, I hate it when that happens. So what does a creator do? The creator, when he designed this planet thousands of years ago, he created Earth with a rotating iron core. Now, a rotating metal, you know this from Physics 101, a rotating metal sets up what we call an electromagnetic field. And so this rotating iron core in our Earth, when God designed it thousands of years ago, sets up a magnetic field that you can see there, effectively shields the Earth from a vast, vast majority of this devastating, destructive, deadly solar wind. And so when I look at that, I'm reminded of the verse in the Bible. It's found in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 20, where God said that His creation is clearly seen. Okay, let's say those two words together. Clearly seen in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. And so how was the solar system built? Well, you might also think these disparate bodies, and the author is talking about the planets and their moons in our little solar system, are scattered across the solar system without rhyme or reason. But look what he says next in the 10 letters there. But move any piece of the solar system today, or try to add anything more, and the whole construction would be thrown fatally out of kilter. What's he saying? He's saying that our solar system is so exquisitely designed that the moons and the planets, if they are moved, if they are adjusted, would throw everything out of kilter. It's not just a random process. This is an amazing, amazing design. And then he asks a rhetorical question. I love this question at the end of the quote there. Look what it says. So how exactly did this delicate architecture, his words, not mine, delicate architecture come to be? ? That reminds me of a verse in the Bible. It's found in the book of Romans, chapter 1, and verse 20, where God says His creation is, what's the 2 words, class? Clearly seen, clearly seen. And the Genesis account of creation gives us the best explanation. And then PhysOrg said just 2 short years ago, PhysOrg is an evolutionary publication online, perhaps our solar system is unique in several respects. I would certainly agree with that this morning. Our little solar system is unique in a number of respects. And Sir Isaac Newton agrees, saying, and Sir Isaac Newton lived centuries ago in England there, the most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. And Sir Isaac Newton was the greatest scientist probably who ever lived. He wrote twice as much about his faith in Christ than he did about the science and the scientific discoveries he made. He was an exceptional creation scientist. In a stunning surprise, almost all the newly discovered solar systems look very different from our own. And this comes from a secular source 2 short years ago. When I read this quote, stunning surprise, they're surprised at it. We as creation scientists are not surprised that the newly discovered solar system looks so different from our own. It reminds me of a verse in the Bible. It's found in the book of Romans, chapter 1, verse 20, where God says his creation is clearly seen. And then Thompson said, March of last year, just last year, according to a new simulation, our home system is even weirder, there's a good scientific word, weirder than we thought. His way of saying we really are living in a unique solar system, populated by planets that are exquisitely designed. And then I'll end with this morning, Saturn and Jupiter, and they only found this out just a few years ago. A French astrophysicist discovered that the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn keep the Earth's orbit from becoming chaotic. Now we're finding out why God placed those huge planets with their great gravitational attraction in our solar system the way he placed it. Without the orbital stability produced by Saturn and Jupiter, the Earth's orbit would make extreme changes, causing instability in our climate and making the Earth uninhabitable. So the question in the morning is, did you thank the Lord for Jupiter and Saturn in your devotions this morning? And again, the great gravitational attraction of these planets cause the other planets to remain stable, such as the planet Earth. I think that's just amazing. But one other thing before I close, the great attraction, gravitational attraction of these large planets also pull those pesky comets and asteroids that would otherwise pepper Earth, and they act as celestial linebackers and pull those comets and asteroids away from Earth so that we don't get peppered by these huge asteroids and comets that would just ruin our day. And so isn't that neat? Don't we see God's hand? Well, I didn't get into the scientific evidence for creation in my field of biology. But anyway, that is something that is just simply amazing when it comes to God's living creation. Rob has on the back table there some books for you. I just wanted to take 60 seconds and I'm done sharing with you the books that we have available, such as Creation Basics and Beyond. This is a good textbook for somebody who wants to be a scientist or go into nursing or pre-med that you know here in this area as they go off to college or university. Get them this book. As a matter of fact, buy 2 books. Get one for yourself and one for that individual that you know that's going on to college or university. Creation Basics and Beyond. Folks, this book answers the questions that people have, like who were the cavemen? Look on page 14, men who lived in caves. Okay? And so very profound answers to some of the questions here. Where did Cain get his wife? Well, I'd tell you if I was able, but some of the answers there. Thank you. And then the Book of Beginnings. This is written by Henry Morris III, the oldest son of the late Henry Morris, who put together the Institute for Creation Research in the early 1970s in San Diego. This is a great book to get your pastor. The Book of Beginnings, and it's a well thought out, it's a significant book, it's a wonderful book to study in the 50 chapters of the book of Genesis. This is a great book for either your wife or your husband or the pastor of your church. Good birthday present, get them this book. And then finally, let me end up with this, the ocean book that I wrote a couple of years ago when we were still in San Diego. I submitted it to the Christian Writers Guild of San Diego. and I got first place prize. So that's a little pat on the back there, and that was a lot of fun writing this book. Since I wrote this book, we've done a second edition. It's revised and expanded. So this is the revised and expanded, updated version of the ocean book. And so this is a great book to read to your grandkids, your great-grandkids, or just your pretty good grandkids. Thank you. They would enjoy looking through this book there. So I do appreciate very much a time that I've been given to share with you the wonders and mysteries of God's creation. And I wish you all the best. It's been a wonderful, productive weekend. And please check us out on the Institute for Creation Research. It's ICR.org.